My daughter sat beside me, 12 years old, quiet, still grieving her mother. And she watched it happen. She watched neighbors avoid our eyes. She watched strangers judge us without knowing a single fact. She watched adults treat cruelty like community standards. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to explain that the lake wasn't theirs to control, that the dock was older than their rules, that we came here for peace, not war. But I stayed silent. Because silence was the plan. What they didn't know, what that room didn't understand, was that I wasn't just another homeowner trying to survive an HOA bully. I had been documenting everything. The fines, the threats, the fake complaints, the inspections sent like a tax. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to expose. And when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't shout. It ends everything. My wife was a cancer patient. She didn't lose to the sickness. She fought it like a warrior, quietly, bravely, and without ever asking the world for sympathy. But some fights don't end in victory. Some fights end in goodbyes. One evening, under the cold lights of a hospital room, she squeezed my hand one last time, and then she was gone. For me, life paused. For my daughter, it shattered. Emma was only 12. She used to be the kind of child who filled every room with questions and laughter. After her mother died, that same child became a shadow. Her voice got softer, her smile disappeared, and every night she would sit near the window like she was waiting for someone to come back. I tried to keep things normal, tried to be strong for her, tried to pretend that routine could stitch grief back together. But nothing worked, so I left the city. My father had owned land near Silver Pine Lake, almost 300 acres of open wilderness, clean air and quiet, a place where trees whispered instead of car horns, a place where the sky didn't disappear behind buildings, a place where silence wasn't lonely, it was healing. That land had always felt like an escape when I was younger. Now, it felt like our last chance. Emma didn't argue when I told her we were leaving. She didn't even ask questions. She just nodded once, as if she was tired of fighting too. The move was simple. A few boxes, some clothes, a handful of memories that felt too heavy to carry, but impossible to leave behind. The cabin itself was old, but strong. Wooden walls, a stone chimney, a porch that faced the lake like it had been built to watch peace move across the water. The first morning there, the lake looked unreal. The surface was smooth as glass, untouched, unbothered. Mist hovered above it like a soft blanket. Everything around it felt calm, like the whole world was holding its breath. I stood on the dock with a fishing rod in my hand, not even planning to catch anything. Just listening, just trying to remember what it felt like to exist without pressure. Emma sat beside me, knees pulled up to her chest, quiet but present. For a long time, we didn't speak. And strangely, it didn't feel awkward. It felt like the kind of silence that understands you. Then, softly, she broke it. "Dad," I looked at her. "Yeah?" Her eyes stayed on the water, not on me. "Will things really be okay here?" The question was small, but it carried everything. Fear, hope, doubt. The kind of question a child asks when she's tired of being disappointed by life. I smiled gently, the kind of smile you give when you want someone to believe you, even if you're still convincing yourself. "Yes," I said. "They will." She didn't smile back, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. A beginning. We started building small routines. Mornings on the dock, afternoons walking through the trees, evenings by the fireplace, where the crackling wood was louder than the thoughts in our heads. One afternoon, I found Emma by the shore collecting stones, flat ones, smooth ones that looked like they belonged to the lake. "What are those for?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. I just like how they feel." I nodded, understanding more than she realized. Sometimes you don't need a reason to hold on to something calm. Sometimes you just need something that doesn't hurt. A few days passed, and I started to see little pieces of her return. She pointed out a bird. She asked me what kind of tree something was. She even laughed once, quiet and quick, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to laugh anymore. And I almost believed we had made it. Almost believed we were invisible here. Almost believed grief couldn't reach us in the woods. But peace doesn't always last, because while Silver Pine Lake looked untouched, it wasn't unclaimed. There were houses farther down the road, neat lawns, perfect fences, mailbox rows like soldiers standing in line. And somewhere among those homes was a woman who didn't believe anyone was allowed to live freely, not without permission, not without control, not without paying a price. I didn't know her name yet, but I would. And I didn't know she was watching us yet, but she was. Still, that morning, standing beside my daughter, I felt something different inside me, not just sadness, not just exhaustion, determination. Because I didn't bring Emma here only to survive. I brought her here to see something important. That not every storm has to be met with panic. That sometimes the loudest people aren't the strongest ones. That power doesn't always scream. Sometimes real power stays quiet. It collects facts. It waits. It listens. And when the truth finally speaks, it ends everything. We hadn't even been at Silver Pine Lake for a full week when peace blinked and trouble walked right up to my porch like it owned the place. It was early afternoon, warm enough that the air smelled like pine needles baking in sunlight. Emma was down by the shoreline, crouched near the water, collecting smooth stones the way kids do when they want something quiet to hold on to. I was on the porch tightening a loose railing, listening to nothing but the birds and the soft lap of the lake. Then I heard footsteps, not the slow, wandering steps of someone enjoying nature. These steps had direction, a straight line, a mission. I looked up. A woman stood at the base of my porch steps as if she'd practiced this moment in a mirror. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. Her makeup was perfect in a way that didn't feel like beauty. It felt like armor. Expensive clothes, polished shoes, and in her arms a thick binder hugged to her chest like a shield. Behind her, parked just off the road, sat a white SUV clean enough to reflect sunlight. The HOA logo was printed on the door like a badge, like a warning, like a statement. We're official. We're watching, Mr. Cross, she said, and her voice was sweet, too sweet. Like sugar on something rotten. Welcome to the Silver Pine Lake community. I set my tools down slowly and wiped my hands on a cloth. Thanks, I replied, calm. And you are? Her smile didn't change, but her eyes did. They sharpened, measured me. She opened the binder immediately, without being asked, flipping pages like she'd been waiting all morning to perform this routine. Margaret Hale, HOA president. She said it the way someone says a title that should automatically make others step back. This is a routine visit. Routine. She didn't say it like a greeting. She said it like a command. You'll need to complete HOA orientation, she continued, tapping her pen against the paper. Annual dues, dock approval, shoreline compliance agreement, lake usage forms. Her pen moved down the list as if my life was just another checklist. All of it is due by Friday. I didn't blink, didn't let my expression change. I never signed anything with an HOA, I said evenly. This land belonged to my father. Her smile tightened like a belt being pulled one notch too far. HOA membership is implied with lakefront property, she replied, as if she'd said the sentence so many times she no longer heard how ridiculous it sounded. Everyone here follows the rules. Otherwise, the community falls apart. I glanced past her, toward the lake. Emma was watching now, standing a little behind the trees, half hidden. She didn't speak, she didn't move. She just stared, quiet, observant, absorbing every detail like she was learning a lesson she never asked for. I looked back at Margaret. I came here for peace, I said. For my daughter. not conflict. For the first time, the warmth in her voice dropped. Margaret closed the binder. The sound was sharp, final, like a judge's gavel. She stepped closer until she was at the bottom of my porch steps, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive, something heavy, something that didn't belong near pine trees and lake water. "Mr. Cross," she said softly, but now her words were edged like glass. "Rules are enforced here." Her eyes flicked toward the lake, toward Emma, and back to me. "And people who don't cooperate don't stay comfortable for long." There it was. Not a threat she could get in trouble for. Not a threat written in ink, a threat hidden inside a smile. Then she turned and walked away like she'd already won, heels clicking against the wood as she stepped off my porch, as if this land was part of her territory and I was just a visitor. I stood there, watching her climb into her SUV. The engine started. The tires rolled away. And for a moment, all I could hear again was the lake, but the calm didn't feel the same anymore. That night, the first envelope arrived. Heavy cardstock. Gold trim. Placed neatly in our mailbox like a gift, except it felt like poison. I opened it slowly. Violation notice: 1 dock use and unauthorized dock usage. Fine, $150 in dollars. Deadline, immediate. I stared at the words, then looked out at the water through the cabin window. The lake was still, peaceful, peaceful, innocent. Emma came beside me, her small hands gripping the hem of her sweater. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, did we do something wrong?" I folded the notice with slow, controlled fingers and slid it into my pocket like it was nothing. "No," I said firmly, "we didn't." I knelt beside her so she could see my face clearly, so she could hear certainty in my voice, even if she didn't feel it yet. "But someone doesn't like that we're not afraid." Outside, the night air had turned colder than it should have been. The lake remained calm, but something else had entered this place now, something ugly that didn't belong here. That was when I understood the truth. This HOA didn't run on rules. It ran on fear. And that first envelope wasn't a fine. It was an introduction. And it was only the beginning. The next morning, there was no knock at the door. And somehow, that was worse. A knock means someone wants to be seen. A knock means the attack has a face. But when I stepped outside and saw the vehicle already waiting in front of my cabin, parked like it had every right to be there, I felt something tighten in my chest. White paint. Government plates. A man sitting behind the wheel with a clipboard resting on his lap, pen ready, posture stiff, not a neighbor. A county inspector. He got out slowly, like he'd done this 1,000 times, like he already knew the ending of the story before the first line was spoken. His eyes scanned the property the way people look at something they expect to find wrong. "Mr. Cross," he said flatly, not unkind, but not warm either. "We received a complaint about unauthorized shoreline modifications." The word sounded official, serious, heavy, like a sentence waiting for a verdict. I glanced back toward the doorway. Emma stood there, silent and still, her small frame half hidden behind the door frame. She didn't step out, didn't ask questions. She just watched, her face unreadable, but her eyes filled with that same quiet fear I'd been trying to protect her from. I kept my voice calm. "I haven't modified anything," I said. "That dock has been here since my father owned this land." The inspector lifted one shoulder in a shrug that said, "Not my problem. Let's take a look." He walked straight past me, boots crunching lightly over gravel, and crouched near the dock like he was inspecting a crime scene. He pressed his palm against the boards, counted nails, measured distances with a small tape, took photographs from multiple angles. Every click of his camera felt like a threat being documented, except I hadn't done anything wrong. The lake remained peaceful. The mist was already burning off in the sunlight. Birds still moved between trees. But the air around my cabin felt different now. It felt watched. 15 minutes later, he closed his folder with a dry snap and tucked the pen behind his ear. "There's no violation here," he said, voice still neutral. Then, as if something in him softened, just slightly, he paused, leaned closer, and lowered his voice. "Between us, someone on this road really likes calling us." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't want to give this situation emotion. Emotion was what they wanted. Anger. Explosions. A scene they could point to later and say, "See? He's the problem." I watched the inspector drive away, dust rising briefly behind his tires. And the second his vehicle disappeared down the road, the silence returned, but it wasn't peace anymore. It was a warning. That same afternoon, 2 emails landed in my inbox like timed punches. Noise complaint. Wildlife disturbance. I read them twice, slowly, as if the words might change. We hadn't made noise. Emma barely spoke. The loudest thing in our home was the crackling of the fireplace at night. And disturbing wildlife? We were the only ones in that area who left the trees untouched, the shoreline natural, the lake unbothered. Yet here it was, formal language, stamped with authority, designed to feel like we were already guilty. The next day, another envelope appeared. No knocking, no confrontation, just paper and penalty. Heavy cardstock again, gold trim again. Like intimidation dressed up as professionalism. Violation notice to improper lake equipment storage. Fine, $20. Deadline, 48 hours. Emma picked it up first this time. Her fingers held the paper gently, like it might cut her. She read it silently, lips moving slightly, then looked up at me. "Dad," she whispered, and her voice cracked in a way that made my stomach drop. "Are we going to have to leave?" That question hit harder than any fine. Because she wasn't asking about money. She wasn't asking about rules. She was asking if life was about to take one more thing from her. I knelt in front of her, placing my hands lightly on her shoulders, forcing her to look at me, not at the envelope, not at the lake, not at the fear. "No," I said firmly, "we're not going anywhere." She blinked, and for the first time in days, her eyes looked glossy. "Promise?" she asked. "I promise." And that was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, not panic. Focus. That evening, I stopped reacting like a man being targeted and started thinking like a man gathering proof. No shouting, no arguments, no emotional replies. I pulled out a notebook, laid it on the kitchen table, and opened to a clean page. Dates, times, names, notice numbers, fine amounts, vehicle plates, screenshots, photos. Every envelope went into a folder. Every email got saved. Every visit got recorded. Because I wasn't just being harassed anymore. I was being tested. And I refused to fail. Later that week, I saw her across the lake, Margaret Hale. Standing on her manicured lawn like a queen surveying land she believed belonged to her. Arms folded, shoulders square, face cold with satisfaction. She lifted her phone. Click. Another photo. Click. I didn't wave, didn't smile. I just stood there still, calm, unshaken, because I understood it now. This fight wouldn't be won with noise. It would be won with evidence. And Margaret still didn't realize I had started counting. The next day, the HOA called a community meeting. Not an invitation, not a discussion. A summons. It came in a stiff email with polite words that didn't match the tone underneath. Attendance strongly encouraged. G.S. Important community matter. By late afternoon, The sky had begun to dull into that gray-blue color that always makes the air feel heavier than it should. I parked outside the community hall with Emma beside me, her hands resting in her lap, fingers twisting the sleeve of her sweater over and over. "Do we have to go in?" she asked quietly. I looked at her. She didn't sound scared the way a child is scared of the dark. She sounded tired, like she was scared of people. "We do," I said gently, "but we're going to walk in with our heads up." The hall was already full when we entered. Rows of folding chairs, a long table at the front, a microphone standing center stage like a weapon waiting to be used. And faces. Faces I used to greet with polite nods when I passed them on the road. Faces that once smiled back, faces that now looked away the second I met their eyes. Some whispered, some stared openly. Some didn't even try to hide their judgment, like my name had already been stamped across a file as problem resident. Emma's posture stiffened beside me. I felt it instantly, her shoulders curling inward, her body trying to make itself smaller. I placed a hand lightly on her back as we sat. At the front of the room stood Margaret Hale. She didn't look like someone attending a meeting. She looked like someone about to deliver a sentence. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect hair. A calm, practiced expression that made her seem reasonable until you looked closely enough to see what was underneath. Satisfaction. She lifted the microphone as if it belonged to her, as if the room belonged to her, as if every person sitting there was part of her inventory. "We have a problem in this community," she announced. Her voice echoed cleanly through the hall, smooth as polished marble. "A homeowner," she continued, "who is being selfish, who refuses to allow public access to the lake." The words hit the room like a stone thrown into water. Whispers spread instantly, quick and hungry, like people had been waiting for permission to judge out loud. Margaret glanced down at her notes, then back up. Dramatic, controlled, theatrical. "We all pay our dues," she said. "We all follow the standards. But some people," she paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, "only think about themselves." And that's when the room turned toward me, dozens of eyes. Some curious, some angry, some disappointed, as if I'd personally betrayed them. I didn't move. Emma sat beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide but steady. She wasn't a baby anymore. She understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a meeting. This was a stage. And we were the villains in Margaret's story. One by one, people stood to support her, not because they knew the truth, because they loved the feeling of standing on the right side. "Rules apply to everyone," one man said, voice loud with confidence. "If we make exceptions, we lose order," a woman added, nodding like she was repeating something she'd been taught. "This is about protecting the community," someone else said, as if they were defending a sacred cause. Protecting the community. From what? From a grieving father fixing his porch? From a quiet child collecting stones? It would have been almost laughable if it wasn't so cruel. The most dangerous lie in the world isn't the one spoken with anger. It's the one spoken calmly, confidently, with a room full of people ready to believe it because it's easier than thinking. I listened to every word without interrupting. Not because I didn't want to defend myself, but because I knew what defending myself would look like to them. A desperate man, a guilty man, a loud man trying to talk his way out of trouble, and Margaret would smile because that was exactly what she wanted. So I stayed quiet, because I knew something they didn't. I had already done the work, quietly, carefully, patiently. While Margaret was sending envelopes and making calls, I was speaking to people privately when no one was watching. People who had their own folders hidden in drawers, their own notices, their own fear. I learned her pattern. Public humiliation first. Make an example. Then private threats disguised as policy reminders. Then fines that escalated until the homeowner either obeyed or left. Margaret didn't enforce rules. She enforced submission. And she did it with the same weapon every time: embarrassment. I wasn't against HOA rules. I understood why communities had them. But I had a problem with abuse, with intimidation dressed up as order, with authority that had no restraint, with power being used like a leash around people's throats. And I didn't just suspect it anymore. I had proof. Not one or two pieces. Stacks. Emails. Notices. Photos. Plate numbers. Witness statements. Timestamps that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. At the end of the meeting, Margaret looked straight at me, her chin lifted slightly. Her eyes narrowed. She was waiting. Waiting for me to snap. Waiting for me to raise my voice. Waiting for me to beg or fight or embarrass myself in front of everyone so she could point and say, "See, this is the problem. I didn't give her that." Instead, I slowly reached for Emma's hand. Her fingers were cold. But the moment I held them, I felt her breathe out like she'd been holding her breath the entire meeting. I stood up. Not dramatically, not angrily, calmly. And I walked toward the exit with my daughter beside me. People watched us pass, some with guilt, some with suspicion, some with the smug satisfaction of thinking they'd just helped save their community. None of them understood what they had just witnessed. They didn't know that the man they'd labeled selfish was quietly gathering the truth for all of them. And Margaret still believed she was winning. The next day, the HOA called an urgent meeting. No explanation. No agenda. No polite wording to soften it. Just a message that felt like a fire alarm. Short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. By the time Emma and I arrived at the community hall, the parking lot was packed. People stood outside in tight groups, whispering in half sentences, their faces tense, like they could sense something was about to break. Inside, the room was full again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Yesterday had felt like a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. Today felt like a storm hovering over the roof, heavy, waiting, unpredictable. Neighbors sat rigid in their chairs. Some leaned toward each other, speaking in quiet bursts. Others stared straight ahead, as if they were afraid eye contact might drag them into whatever was coming. Even the people who'd nodded along with Margaret the day before didn't look confident now. They looked uneasy. And Margaret sat at the front like she always did. Back straight, chin lifted, hands neatly folded, as if she was preparing for a photo, not a meeting. Her binder sat beside her, perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. That same controlled smile rested on her face. But I noticed something else too. Her eyes moved too often. She was scanning the room, watching for signs, trying to predict the ending. Emma walked beside me quietly. She didn't clutch my arm this time. She didn't ask if we had to be here. She just moved with that stillness she'd learned in grief, careful, alert, listening with her whole body. We took our seats. The meeting began with no introduction, no warm welcome, no speech about community values. Just a man from the board clearing his throat and saying, "We'll begin." Margaret's smile stayed in place, right up until she saw me stand. I rose slowly, not rushing, not making a scene, just moving with purpose. The room followed me with their eyes as I walked down the aisle toward the front. No one spoke. Even the whispers stopped. I could hear the soft hum of the overhead lights. Emma's gaze stayed on me, steady and unblinking. When I reached the front table, I placed a thick file folder down so gently it barely made a sound, but the weight of it felt loud enough to shake the air. Then I turned to the room. For the first time since coming to Silver Pine Lake, I didn't stay silent. "My name is Daniel Cross," I said calmly, "and I'm a senior oversight officer assigned to investigate HOA misconduct." The room went dead quiet, not awkward quiet, not polite quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a truth lands and everyone realizes they've been standing on the wrong side of it. Someone in the back inhaled sharply. A chair creaked as a man shifted in disbelief. Margaret's face didn't change at first, but the color began to drain, slowly, like life leaving a photograph. For months, I continued, voice steady, our office has been receiving complaints from this community. Abuse of authority. Threats disguised as rules. Public humiliation used as enforcement. Unlawful fines meant to scare residents into obedience. I opened the folder. The sound of paper sliding against paper cut through the silence like a blade. My presence here wasn't random, I said. And it wasn't personal. It was intentional and confidential. We needed reality, not performance. I reached into the folder and began laying items on the table, one by one. Official notices, stamped and dated. Copies of emails and follow-up warnings. Photographs of inspectors arriving after false complaints. Written statements from residents. Some signed, some anonymous, but all consistent. A pattern so clear it didn't need exaggeration. With every piece of evidence placed down, Margaret's posture grew stiffer, as if she was trying to hold herself together through sheer will. But her hands had stopped moving. No pen tapping, no page turning, no confident gestures, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when someone realizes their power was never real, only borrowed. An HOA exists to serve the people who live here, I said, looking around the room, meeting eyes that had refused to meet mine yesterday. It exists to keep order for the benefit of the community, not to become a weapon, not to become a throne, not to become a tool for personal control. I paused, letting the message sink in. We do not get to hurt people emotionally in the name of authority, I continued. We do not get to scare families, isolate neighbors, or turn communities into pressure chambers just because someone likes being obeyed. No one moved. No one interrupted. Even the residents who had defended Margaret the day before sat frozen, as if they were reliving every moment they'd stayed quiet when they should have spoken. I won't pretend I wasn't angry, I admitted, my voice softening just slightly. I'm human. I'm a father. I've watched my daughter lose her mother, and then watched grown adults treat us like we were the enemy. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it break my tone. But this was never revenge, I said firmly. This was duty. Then I said what I hadn't shared with anyone in that community, not even in whispers. My transfer here had already been approved, I told them. But my wife's illness kept me tied to the city longer than planned. When she passed, I came here to finish what I'd been assigned to do. A ripple moved through the room, not judgment this time. Understanding. Some faces softened. Some eyes dropped to the floor, ashamed. This, I said, closing the folder slowly, was the real reason I came. Then I turned my gaze to Margaret. She didn't look at me, not directly. She stared at the table like it might open and swallow her whole. Effective immediately, I said clearly, Margaret Hale is removed from her position as HOA president. Pending further review, she will also be subject to formal disciplinary action for misuse of authority and documented harassment. There was no cheering, no clapping, no dramatic outburst, just something quieter. Relief. A release of tension that felt like the whole room exhaled at once. And when I turned back toward my seat, I saw Emma. She was smiling. Not the polite, forced smile she'd been wearing for months. A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind that says something inside her finally believed the world could be fair again. And in that moment, I understood what mattered most. It wasn't Margaret losing her power. It was Emma seeing that power never belonged to bullies in the first place.